Think medieval knights just used swords. Think again. Archaeological evidence reveals 15 devastating weapons that could split armor, crush skulls, and launch 300-pound boulders through castle walls. These weren't toys, they were instruments of death that could end your life in seconds. Ready to discover the deadliest arsenal the medieval world ever created? 1. Longbow, medieval England's secret weapon that terrorized French knights for centuries. Historical records showed these 6-foot monsters could punch through plate armor at 200 yards. English archers trained from childhood, developing 150-pound draw weights that would snap modern arms. At Agincourt, 5,000 longbowmen slaughtered 10,000 French nobles in minutes. The genius lay in its range. You'd be dead before hearing the twang. 2. Sword, the ultimate symbol of medieval warfare. But not for the reasons Hollywood taught you to believe. While movies portray swords as primary weapons dominating every battlefield, historical studies reveal they were actually sophisticated backup tools deployed when everything else failed catastrophically. The real genius lay in their incredible versatility, precision thrusting points that could find microscopic armor gaps, devastating cutting edges for unarmored opponents, and robust crossguards for binding and controlling enemy weapons during close combat. Medieval communities established strict social hierarchies around sword ownership that went far beyond simple possession. These weren't just weapons, they were status symbols that cost more than a peasant's lifetime income and required master craftsmen, MOS, to forge properly. The advanced technique involved half-swording, deliberately gripping the sharp blade with armored gauntlets for precise thrusts through armored joints, essentially transforming the sword into a controlled short spear for surgical strikes. Designs offered varying battlefield specializations, massive longswords for two-handed combat requiring incredible strength, versatile arming swords for single-hand use with defensive shields, and specialized e-stocks with needle-sharp points designed exclusively for thrusting through heavy plate armor gaps. Historical research shows medieval swords required extensive daily maintenance and expert metallurgy that few blacksmiths could master. The weapon's devastating effectiveness came not from raw destructive power, but from surgical precision, lightning, speed, and years of dedicated training. Master swordsmen could find gaps in full plate armor that seemed physically impossible to exploit through pure skill. 3. War hammer. When swords bounced off plate armor, the warhammer crushed through it. This wasn't your carpenter's tool. It was a surgical instrument of death, designed specifically for armored combat. The genius lay in its concentrated impact. While a sword spread force across its edge, the hammer's spike focused hundreds of pounds per square inch into a point smaller than a pencil tip. One side featured a brutal spike for piercing, the other a blunt face for delivering concussions through the thickest helmets. Knights carried them as backup weapons, knowing that against heavy armor, nothing else would do the job, for flail perhaps. History's most terrifying weapon, a spiked ball on a chain that could wrap around shields and crush skulls. Originally an agricultural tool for threshing grain, peasant armies transformed it into an instrument of nightmare. The genius lay in its unpredictable striking pattern. No shield could fully protect against its whirling, wrapping motion. Battlefield remains show flails were primarily peasant weapons, especially during the Hussite Wars. The chain allowed strikes from impossible angles, hooking around enemy defenses to smash unprotected areas. Different materials offered varying applications: wooden handles with metal studs, steel chains with spiked balls, or leather straps for silent approaches. Medieval communities established safety protocols for flail training. One wrong move could kill the wielder. The weapon demanded extensive practice, but rewarded skilled users with devastating results. Modern science typically focuses on its intimidation factor, but the flail's true power lay in bypassing traditional defensive techniques that worked against rigid weapons. 5. Halberd. Swiss infantry revolutionized warfare with this multi-tool of death. Combining spear point, axe blade, and hooking spike, the halberd gave foot soldiers everything needed to dismantle heavy cavalry. At 6 to 8 feet long, it provided reach while offering versatility no single weapon could match. The genius lay in its specialized components. The spear point thrust through gaps in armor, the axe blade chopped through shields and limbs, while the hook pulled riders from horses. Military records show halberds were mass-produced and standardized, marking Europe's first industrial weapon manufacturing. Medieval communities established halberd formations called hedgehogs, defensive squares, bristling with points that cavalry could unpenetrate. The technique involved coordinated movements where soldiers created impenetrable forests of steel. Different configurations offered varying specializations: longer points for cavalry, heavier blades for siege work, and sharper hooks for grappling. The weapon's devastating effectiveness came from its economy. One halberd provided 3 weapon functions at the cost of a single sword. Modern tests demonstrate how properly trained halberdiers could systematically dismantle the most heavily armored opponents through combined attacks, targeting multiple vulnerabilities simultaneously. 6. Mace, the ultimate armor crusher that made swords obsolete. When plate armor reached perfection in the 14th century, knights turned to maces, weapons designed purely for blunt trauma. Unlike swords that needed to penetrate, maces delivered their full kinetic energy through any armor, causing internal injuries even when the metal remained intact. Historical finds show maces evolved from simple clubs to sophisticated weapons with flanged heads, protrusions, and precisely calculated weight distribution. The technique involved using momentum and leverage to maximize impact force. Swiss battlefield remains from the 15th century reveal skulls completely caved in by mace strikes, damage that no helmet could prevent. Different methods offered varying approaches: wooden shafts for speed, metal handles for durability, and stone heads for maximum mass. The genius lay in its simplicity. No complex mechanisms to fail, just raw physics delivered with devastating efficiency. Modern comparisons show mace impacts exceeded what human bones could possibly withstand. 7. Poleaxe. The Swiss perfected this knightly weapon of choice for dismounted combat. Standing 5 to 6 feet tall, the poleaxe combined an axe blade, hammerhead, and piercing spike into one devastating package. Excavations revealed these weren't crude clubs, they were precision instruments with modular heads, allowing customization for specific battles. The technique involved quarterstaff fighting principles, using the entire shaft for blocking, striking, and tripping opponents. Medieval communities established strict training protocols for poleaxe combat. Knights considered it the ultimate dueling weapon, so effective that being poleaxed entered common language, meaning to be utterly defeated. Different methods offered varying configurations: axe and hammer, axe and spike, or hammer and spike combinations. The weapon's devastating efficiency came from its reach advantage over swords, while maintaining the versatility of 3 weapons in one. Modern tests show it could shatter skulls even through reinforced helmets. 8. Pike. These weren't mere spears. They were tactical revolutionaries that transformed medieval warfare from aristocratic dueling to democratic slaughter. 20 feet of ashwood with a steel point that ended the age of heavy cavalry. Ancient texts show pikes required specific metallurgy for their tips and precise engineering. For their balance points to prevent unwieldy handling, the genius lay in formation fighting. Individual pikes were unwieldy death traps, but massed together they created impenetrable barriers that no cavalry could penetrate. Scottish schiltrons at Bannockburn proved that disciplined pike squares could slaughter the finest knights in Europe like cattle. Different lengths offered varying tactical applications: 16-foot pikes for defensive squares, 20-footers for offensive charges, and specialized 25-foot monsters for siege work. The technique involved maintaining rigid formation integrity, while presenting a forest of steel points that warhorses physically could approach without suicide. Medieval communities established brutal training regimens for pike warfare, where broken formation meant death for entire units. The weapon's devastating effectiveness came from psychological warfare as much as physical damage. Even the most trained cavalry horses refused to charge into obvious but contemporary battlefield accounts describe the horrifying effectiveness of these weapons in graphic detail. A single disciplined pike formation could hold ground against 10 times their number in heavy cavalry, marking the permanent beginning of infantry dominance that would reshape European warfare for centuries. 9. Dane axe. Vikings perfected this two-handed instrument of absolute terror that could cleave through shields, armor, and bone with equally devastating ease. Standing 4 to 5 feet tall, with broad razor-sharp blades, the Dane axe required both hands, but delivered catastrophic results that no medieval armor could withstand. Viking burial sites show these were uncrewed barbarian tools. They were precision weapons with sophisticated metallurgy and deliberate weight distribution. The genius lay in leverage and momentum physics. The long handle multiplied striking force exponentially, while the broad blade concentrated that massive energy along a thin cutting edge. Contemporary chronicles describe Dane axes splitting mail-clad warriors from crown to groin in single devastating strokes. The Bayeux Tapestry depicts Anglo-Saxon warriors using these weapons to horrifying effect against Norman cavalry, literally chopping through horse and rider together, and specialized bearded designs for hooking and ripping away enemy shields. Medieval communities established axe-fighting traditions that emphasized relentless mobility and overwhelming aggression over defensive techniques. The technique involved continuous motion patterns. Stopping meant instant death against faster sword-wielding opponents. Different blade configurations offered varying battlefield applications: narrow heads for piercing heavy armor, broad blades for sweeping attacks through multiple enemies. Its steel bolts punched through chainmail like paper, giving infantry the power to kill mounted knights from safety. Ancient artifacts show Dane axes evolve throughout the medieval period, becoming increasingly specialized for pure warfare rather than utility work. With some examples featuring decorated blades that demonstrated their owner's status and wealth. 10. Crossbow, the medieval machine gun that terrified the Pope himself, so deadly Pope Innocent II banned its use against Christians in 1139. Though pagans were fair game, unlike longbows requiring years of training, any peasant could master a crossbow in weeks. Chinese designs reached 1,200-pound draw weights, launching bolts that could pierce 3 men standing in line. 11. Ballista, Rome's ultimate precision siege weapon that medieval armies inherited and perfected into instruments of surgical destruction. This giant crossbow could launch 6-foot steel bolts with enough devastating force to punch completely through castle walls or skewer multiple armored enemies standing in formation. Ancient engineering texts show ballistae used twisted sinew springs, generating thousands of pounds of mechanical force, engineering sophistication that wouldn't be surpassed until gunpowder weapons appeared centuries later. The genius lay in deadly precision over raw destructive power, while massive trebuchets hurled huge stones indiscriminately. Ballistae delivered surgical strikes that could eliminate specific high-value targets at incredible ranges exceeding 500 yards. Medieval communities established specialized engineering crews for ballista operation, as these complex machines required expert technical knowledge to maintain, calibrate, and operate effectively under combat conditions. Different configurations offered varying tactical applications: smaller anti-personnel bolt throwers for eliminating enemy commanders, massive stone-throwing versions for siege warfare against fortifications, and specialized shipborne ballistae for devastating naval combat. The technique involved careful mathematical calculation of spring tension, elevation angles, and wind conditions for pinpoint accurate fire. Military records show medieval ballistae incorporated significant improvements over original Roman designs, including superior metallurgy for stronger springs and more efficient mechanical systems for faster reload times. Contemporary battlefield accounts describe ballista bolts penetrating through multiple ranks of heavily armored soldiers, creating horrifying lanes of death through dense enemy formations. The weapon's effectiveness came from mechanical reliability. Unlike early unpredictable gunpowder weapons, ballistae worked perfectly in any weather conditions and maintained rapid, sustained fire for extended siege operations. 12. Trebuchet, the medieval superweapon that could hurl 300-pound boulders over 400 yards with devastating mathematical precision that modern artillery still envies. Edward I's legendary warwolf, Trebuchet, was so absolutely terrifying that the entire garrison of Stirling Castle surrendered immediately rather than face its apocalyptic destructive power. Castle excavations show these were unsimple catapults throwing rocks. They were sophisticated engineering marvels using counterweight physics principles that modern mechanical engineers continue studying for optimization techniques. The genius lay in perfect energy conversion efficiency. Trebuchets converted gravitational potential energy to kinetic energy with mechanical advantage ratios, impossible to achieve through any other medieval technology. Medieval communities established specialized engineering corps dedicated exclusively to trebuchet construction, as these massive weapons required precise mathematical calculations, advanced metallurgy, and architectural knowledge for optimal battlefield performance. Different designs offered varying destructive capabilities. Human-powered traction trebuchets, operated by coordinated crews. Massive counterweight versions using multi-ton stone boxes for maximum power. And sophisticated hybrid designs combining both propulsion systems for enhanced accuracy. The complex technique involved careful coordination between multiple specialized crews, operating different mechanical components during the intricate loading, aiming, and firing sequence. Medieval manuscripts show trebuchets hurled far more than simple stones. Diseased animal corpses spread devastating plague epidemics. Specialized Greek fire projectiles created unstoppable infernos, and even live prisoners were launched to terrorize defending forces psychologically. Contemporary siege accounts describe trebuchets reducing supposedly impregnable castle walls to complete rubble in mere days rather than months of conventional siege work. The weapon's devastating effectiveness came from psychological warfare as much as pure physical destruction. The thunderous sound of a trebuchet's massive throwing arms slamming forward could be heard for miles, announcing incoming death to terrified defenders. 13. Manganels, the rapid-fire, traction-powered siege engine that predated trebuchets, but remained militarily popular for its incredible mobility and devastating sustained bombardment capabilities. While massive trebuchets required enormous counterweights and permanent construction sites, versatile manganels used coordinated human crews, pulling synchronized rope systems to launch deadly projectiles, making them absolutely perfect for fast-moving armies that needed to strike multiple targets across vast campaign territories. Historical documents show manganels could be rapidly constructed from locally available materials and assembled by ordinary soldiers in hours rather than weeks. Unlike the massive specialized engineering projects required for trebuchet construction, the genius lay in their unmatched tactical flexibility, significantly smaller than trebuchets, but vastly more powerful than any handheld weapons. Manganels filled the perfect middle ground for dynamic siege warfare, requiring both mobility and destructive firepower. Medieval communities established standardized modular designs that could be quickly built by any competent military carpenter using common tools and materials. The specialized technique involved coordinated rope pulling by synchronized crews of 10 to 20 trained men, requiring precise timing and rhythm to achieve maximum range, accuracy, and devastating impact force. Different configurations offered varying battlefield applications: rapid-fire anti-personnel versions for suppressing enemy archers, heavy wall-breaking designs with massive stone projectiles, and specialized incendiary launchers for creating psychological terror. Contemporary siege accounts describe experienced manganel crews maintaining steady bombardments that slower trebuchets could unmatch due to their complex reload sequences. The weapon's devastating effectiveness came from relentless sustained fire rather than single apocalyptic shots. Modern reconstruction tests demonstrate how expertly trained manganel crews could achieve firing rates that kept enemy defenders completely pinned down, while assault troops advanced safely under covering fire, proving their continued tactical value even after trebuchets dominated siege warfare. 14. Hand cannon. Europe spoke true gunpowder firearm that marked the apocalyptic beginning of the end. For traditional medieval warfare as knights knew it, these primitive but revolutionary weapons were crude death tubes, but represented a complete military revolution. Suddenly, any untrained peasant could kill an expensive armored knight with minimal training and zero aristocratic bloodline, appearing like thunder from hell in the 14th century. Military historians show early hand cannons were essentially reinforced metal tubes that fired stones, iron balls, or even scrap metal through explosive chemical force that seemed supernatural to medieval minds. Hand cannons put absolutely devastating killing power directly into any peasant's hands, regardless of physical strength or previous experience. The genius lay in the complete democratization of lethal warfare. While crossbows required moderate skill and longbows demanded decades of specialized training, medieval communities established the first systematic gunpowder manufacturing processes, jealously guarding the explosive secrets of this terrifying new technology that threatened existing social hierarchies. Different designs offered varying destructive capabilities: small, portable handheld versions for individual infantry use, larger wall-mounted defensive cannons for fortress protection, and massive specialized bombards designed specifically for siege warfare. The dangerous technique involved manual ignition through touch holes using slow-burning matches, requiring steady nerves and precise timing under extreme combat pressure. Weapons research shows hand cannons evolved with shocking rapidity, from simple metal tubes to sophisticated weapons featuring proper wooden stocks, improved aiming mechanisms, and standardized ammunition. Contemporary battle accounts describe the psychological terror these weapons created. Their thunderous noise, choking smoke, and supernatural fire seemed like demonic magic to enemies unfamiliar with gunpowder technology. The weapon's devastating effectiveness came not just from incredible penetrating power, but from completely shattering the medieval social order that depended entirely on expensive armor and lengthy aristocratic training traditions. 15 Caltrops, the simplest yet most brutally effective area denial weapon ever created by human military ingenuity. 4-pointed iron spikes, engineered to always land with one needle-sharp point, facing upward, regardless of how they fell. Ancient military texts show these humble but devastating devices could instantly stop cavalry charges, cripple infantry advances, and destroy supply wagons with shocking efficiency that cost almost nothing to deploy. Medieval armies scattered tens of thousands across strategic battlefields, creating vast zones of crippling death that forced enemies into carefully prepared kill zones, where archers and crossbowmen waited in ambush. The genius lay in their incredible economic efficiency. Caltrops cost virtually nothing to mass produce, but could neutralize expensive war horses worth more than entire peasant villages, instantly transforming battlefield dynamics. Medieval communities established sophisticated mass production techniques, with skilled blacksmiths creating these weapons by the thousands for major military async campaigns and storing them in arsenal stockpiles. Different designs offered varying tactical applications. Larger heavy-duty spikes specifically designed for crippling horses, smaller human-foot versions for infantry, specialized hollow caltrops filled with deadly poison, and even naval variants for ship deck fighting could achieve maximum casualties. Military records show caltrops remained militarily relevant for centuries across multiple cultures, with Philip the Good of Burgundy including massive quantities in his niece's dowry as genuinely valuable military assets. Refused to advance through suspected caltrop fields. The weapon's devastating effectiveness came primarily from psychological warfare. Merely knowing caltrops lay ahead forced entire armies to slow down, bunch together, and lose crucial momentum. Modern drug cartels still deploy caltrops against police vehicles, proving this brilliant medieval innovation remains tactically effective 6 centuries after its battlefield debut. And battlefield commanders to create entirely new solutions for penetrating seemingly impenetrable defenses. Historical context: medieval warfare underwent revolutionary transformation through relentless innovation, as opposing armies sought decisive advantages over increasingly sophisticated defensive technologies. Historical research shows weapon development accelerated dramatically during the critical 13th-15th centuries as plate armor reached near perfection. The genius lay in adaptation under pressure. As castle walls grew thicker, siege engines grew more powerful. As armor improved, weapons became more specialized for penetration. As training costs increased, simpler weapons democratized warfare. Medieval communities established sophisticated weapon development programs, with rulers investing massive resources in military research that paralleled modern defense spending. Different regions offered varying approaches. English longbow traditions, Swiss pike formations, Italian crossbow expertise, and Eastern European cavalry innovations. Military studies show these weapons didn't develop in isolation, but influenced each other across vast distances through trade, conquest, and mercenary knowledge transfer. The technique involved constant battlefield testing and refinement based on actual combat results rather than theoretical assumptions.